He's the co-founder of Blockchain Research Institute and an author for over 15 books on digital economy. Please put your hands together for Dan Tapscott.
Well, Don's just, there he is.
Yeah.
He's got quite a jazzy presentation lined up. We saw him working out the magic numbers and the blocks.
Tell us what it's all about.
Thank you.
All yours.
I figured it'd be better with a microphone. No, I'm just going to wander around. Well, thanks very much. I'm delighted to be here. That was a great session with Peggy. And Microsoft is certainly going through a huge transformation now that's very, very positive. I'm here to share with you a very big idea. And the idea is that the internet is entering a second era. For 40 years, we've had an internet of information. Now we're getting an internet of value. And that there is no technology that comes even close to this technology in terms of its potential to create prosperity, good government, and social justice in a sustainable India going forward. So I have a few minutes to make that case to you, and then Sandeep's going to come up and we'll have a bit of a conversation. So let's get into it. You've heard about a bunch of technologies today. Call these the technologies of the fourth industrial age. The underlying technology that enables all of them to participate in the economy, you'd be surprised to hear me say, is actually the technology that enables cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin to work. Blockchain. Blockchain. So it's not the most sonorous word in the world, but I believe this is the second era of the internet. So let me explain that to you. For many decades, we've had this internet of information. But when I send you some information, I'm actually sending you a copy. PDF, a PowerPoint, an email, even with a website, I keep the original. And that's been great. We've had a printing press at our fingertips. But when it comes to the things that really matter for the Indian economy, not just information, but assets, things of value like money or stocks or bonds or contracts or loyalty points, intellectual property, art, music, votes. A vote is an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. Energy, carbon credits, our identities. Copying those is a terrible idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity, and if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? Now, cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for decades. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through intermediaries, middlemen, banks, governments, credit card companies, big social media companies, and they perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They enable us to trust each other. They identify the party, that's Sanjay. They clear and settle transactions, and they keep records. Now, overall, they've done a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. They're all centralized. That means that they can be hacked. Any computer system pretty much today in India can be hacked. But there are other problems. We noticed in 2008 that their behavior is not always good. Let's take the banks. I don't know if you remember where you were in September 15th of 2008. I was on the stage in Vienna, the Sibos Congress, speaking to 10,000 bankers. That was 2 days after Lehman Brothers fell. And it was sort of an awkward conversation that I had with them. But they also exclude 2 billion people from the global economy. They slow things down. It takes a second for an email to go around the world, but it can take days or even weeks for assets to move up the street in Wall Street. They charge too much I mean, it can cost 10 to 20% to send money from one country to another. And the biggest problem is that they're capturing our data. We create this data. It's the new asset class of the digital age. They capture it. The end result has been this extraordinary thing. It's very tough for me to admit this, because I've been probably the biggest champion of digital technology over 40 years. But they've captured the data, the new asset, and the benefits of the digital age are being distributed asymmetrically, to the point where in many countries we have growing wealth and declining prosperity. Our economies are growing, the middle class is shrinking. This is a formula for disaster. It's also a formula for populism and Donald Trump and Brexit and all kinds of other things. Anger, hatred, and problems in society. So, what if there was not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast, global, distributed ledger where anything of value, from money to stocks to votes to music to our identities, could be managed, stored, transacted in a distributed but a secure way. What if there were a native digital medium for value? Well, that's where Bitcoin comes in. Bitcoin is the beginning, but it's not the end. See, in the year 2008, perhaps propitiously, an anonymous person or persons named Nakamoto, this mic crapping out, did I say something wrong? An anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper outlining a new kind of digital cash called Bitcoin. And Satoshi solved the double spend problem. This is the biggest innovation in computer science in a generation. And this is Nobel Prize material. We'll hear from Joe Stiglitz later on. Although we don't know who Satoshi is, so it'd be hard to give the prize. Then again, we knew who Bob Dylan was, and we still couldn't give him a prize anyway. Now, for the first time in human history, people everywhere could trust each other and transact, exchange and manage value. And trust is not achieved by a middleman. It's achieved by cryptography, by collaboration, and by some clever code, which is why my son Alex and I call it the trust protocol. Trust is native to the medium. Now, at this point, most of you are thinking, well, just a second. How is it possible to trust somebody you've never met with no intermediary to identify the parties? How could I send money from my mobile directly to your mobile with nothing in the middle, without a bank? So, you know, the American novelist Mark Twain, he wrote a letter to a friend, and he said, "I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short letter." Well, it's taken me 4 years to tell you what I'm about to tell you in 3 minutes, okay? In 3 minutes, I'm going to tell you how a blockchain works, right? So turn on your stopwatch. Here we go. I paid out that $1,000 to you, and that's broadcast out to a global network of millions of computers, each using the highest level of cryptography. And then all around the world is a group of people called miners. Now this is Bitcoin, the example I'm using. And the miners have massive computing power, estimated to be 20 to 50 times bigger than Google in the world. And these miners do a lot of work to find out the truth. And every 10 minutes, kind of like the heartbeat of a network, a block gets created. And that block contains all the transactions from the last 10 minutes. The fact that I paid you $1,000. Or it could be the fact that someone registered a land title, or two people bought and sold a stock without a stock market. Or it could be that somebody got married, or a light bulb bought some power from a distributed power source. Any transaction. And then the miners use this computing power to validate the block. And the first miner to achieve consensus gets paid some of the cryptocurrency from that blockchain. And then, and this is the important part, that block is connected to the previous block and the previous block to create a chain of blocks. And if I wanted to hack that block and take that $1,000 and double spend it to use the same money to pay everybody in this room to commit fraud, I'd have to hack that block plus the previous block because they're connected with a digital wax seal. I'd have to hack the entire history of commerce on that blockchain, not just on one computer, but on millions of computers simultaneously, each of them using the highest level of cryptography. Now, I won't say that's unhackable, but this is way more secure than the computer systems you have in your company today. The way I like to think of it is a blockchain is something that's highly processed. It's sort of like a chicken McNugget from McDonald's, okay? It's highly processed, right? To hack that blockchain would be like turning that chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, somebody's going to be able to do that someday, but for now, it'll be very tough. I don't know if you watched the show with John Oliver. He's this British guy, but he just did a thing a week ago making fun of that analogy, where he said, man, that would be one messed up chicken. You know, that chicken, my body is whole, but what of my soul? You know, it'd be a chicken that had PSTD or something like that. I used to be a McNugget, now I'm a chicken again. Anyway, so the hype machine has begun. People say to me, well, this is a cover story in The Economist. People say to me, Don, there's so much hype. Reminds me of 1995. This is 1995 all over again. It's like there's so much hype. People used to say, you know, we talk more about the internet of information today than we did in 1995. So if you think there's a lot of hype about blockchain now, get ready, because we're just that much. It's going to be bigger and bigger as this technology infuses itself into society. So I got really lucky. My timing has not always been good with books. I wrote a book about the internet and privacy in 1995, and my mother bought most of the copies. But I've had a few studies and bad timing. But I got the best co-author I've ever had, my son Alex. Turns out he's smarter than I am. He's also a better writer. But we had a joyous collaboration writing this book, and it is the only big bestseller on blockchain in the world. In case you're wondering, this book is selling really well in India, by the way. And if you're wondering how to buy this book, the very best way to get it is in massive volume, large numbers. Don't buy a book. Buy truckloads of books. Do you have friends? No, seriously. I'm very proud of this book, and I hope you enjoy it. So normally people talk about the financial services industry. And this is a machine. It's called a Rube Goldberg machine. Rube Goldberg was an American inventor who created all these ridiculously complicated machines to do something very simple, like crack an egg or open a door. Well, that kind of reminds me of the banking industry, doesn't it? I mean, think about it, how complicated. Very simple thing. You tap your card in a Starbucks, and a bunch of messages go through 6 or 7 companies, each one that has ancient computer systems, each one that delays things, each one that has a cost, each one that has a counterparty risk, and then 3 days later, somebody gets paid. Well, if all of this were on a distributed ledger on a blockchain, there would be no 3-day payment period, because the payment and the settlement would be the very same activity. It would just be a change to the database. So, of course, all the big financial institutions are trying to figure out what all of this means. So this is something from the book. It's actually Alex did this. I won't take credit for it. But I asked him one day, what does the financial industry do? Is there a way of describing that? And he came back a couple of days later, he says, it does 8 things. It authenticates and attests to value. You are who you are, that's a valid stock. It transfers value. Because it does that, it gets to store value. Because it stores value, it gets to lend value. Then it gets to exchange value, stock markets and so on, various marketplaces. It gets to fund and invest venture capital, hedge funds, mutual funds, investment banking. It insures value and manages risk, and it accounts for value, the big accounting companies. Now, in the book, we describe how every one of these can be eliminated by some software on a blockchain. We also discuss how the banks could reinvent themselves around this technology if they wanted to. So this is happening very, very fast. In the book, we said investment banking will be unrecognizable in 5 years. Well, we were wrong. Venture capital is already unrecognizable. There's something called an ICO. Who's heard of an ICO? Hands? Okay. These are crowdfunding campaigns on a blockchain. Last year, ICOs raised $4 billion US, more than all venture capital in the world in this space. So what an exciting new opportunity for India in terms of funding new companies and entrepreneurs, not just in the technology area, but in any area. Now, of course, there are lots of tough issues, and maybe, Sandeep, we can talk about those having to do with regulation and so on. So it's not just financial services, though. It's every sector of the economy that's being changed. And let's start with the corporation. 80 years ago, a Nobel Prize-winning economist named Ronald Coase asked a deceptively simple question. He said, why does the firm exist? Why do we have companies? If Adam Smith is right, why isn't the open market the best mechanism to allocate goods and resources and information and assets and so on? He said, the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. He said the costs in an open market, imagine you tried to make a car or something, but you didn't have a company. Well, you'd have to search and find all the right material and people and so on. The cost of coordination, getting all these people to work together. No, you bring it inside the boundaries of a firm where you have filing cabinets to find information, org charts to find people, business processes to help people be coordinated, management structures to motivate people. The cost of contracting, and overall the cost of establishing trust. So throughout the 21st century, we created these firms that were vertically integrated. They did everything from soup to nuts. Well, that's now changing. Companies are going to start to look more like networks. And little companies will be able to have the capabilities of big companies without the main liabilities. Now, that sounds pretty theoretical. Let me give you a mind-boggling example. In the book, we hypothesized, and you heard Peggy talk about AI, what if you had something that was high automation, but also an organization that was very complex, like a company today? Could you have a decentralized autonomous enterprise? It would have no people. It would be a bunch of what are called smart contracts. These are contracts that just self-execute. Think of a contract made of software that's got a government, a bank, and a lawyer inside the contract. Would that be possible? Well, we thought this is too futuristic. We're not going to publish it, but we decided, no, we'll publish it, because that's where the world may go. A week after the book came out, an organization was launched called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. It had no CEO, no management, and no employees. It was a bunch of smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. Remember, Bitcoin is one of 1,500 blockchains, and it won't be the most important either. Ethereum is kind of like the web, whereas Bitcoin was like email. Bitcoin was the first big app of the Internet of Value, just like email was the first big app of the Internet of Information. So this thing was created. It was a venture capital company with no people, and its goal was to raise money and invest in this space. In 3 weeks, the DAO, this thing, raised $164 million. And then it went about its business. Now, those of you who know the story, it's not a happy ending because there was a coding error in one of the smart contracts. And the end result was the creators of this thing decided to give the money back. But the fact that this could exist, speaking of Bob Dylan, wrote a song, you know, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. I think we're in the early days of a profound change to the deep structure and architecture of the firm, the corporation. And for India, that means how you orchestrate capability to innovate, to create goods and services, to govern yourselves, to create public value, and to solve problems. What an incredible time. So I'd like to close off by taking you on a quick tour through that seems to be better over here, through how could blockchain help create a prosperous and better India? And let me give you a bunch of examples. Number one, we can include globally billions of people in the economy. You know, the thing about a lot of poor people that don't have an identity is they have a supercomputer in their pocket. And for every one of them, you could roll out a blockchain-based identity, and you could also instantly provide them with financial services. This is called economic inclusion and ensuring that everyone gets to participate in the economy. Number two, over 70% of land titles in India are not enforceable. The great Latin American economist, Hernando de Soto, says this is a bigger problem than being banked. Because if you don't have a valid title to your land, you can't borrow against it, you can't plan for the future. And it's not just in India, it's throughout the developing world. You're in Honduras, and it's a picture here. You have a farm, a dictator comes to power and he says, I know you have a piece of paper that says you own your farm, but our government centralized computer says that my friend owns your farm. And this happened on a mass scale. Well, we can now fix this because once you put a land title on a blockchain, now it's got to be a valid land title, and that's a real challenge there. But once you put it on a blockchain, no corrupt clerk or dictator or anybody else can mess with that unless they know how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Number three, there are a lot of people in our economy who create value, but they're not fairly compensated for it. So I'll give you an example. We have these big disruptors today, Uber, Airbnb, and so on. Well, maybe the disruptors could be disrupted. Now, they're called the sharing economy, which I think is a stupid term to describe these companies because they're successful precisely because they don't share. They're service aggregators. They aggregate these services, they sell them. That's created a $55 billion company called Uber. Could we create a real sharing economy that would help prosperity in India? Well, everything that these companies do could be done by smart contracts, a distributed application on a blockchain. How would that work? Well, you're going to Delhi, and you go on to, we'll call it Airbnb, blockchain Airbnb. And you find a really great apartment. It's rated 5 stars. That's what a blockchain is, a database, so it handles that. And then you book it, and that initiates a smart contract. You show up at the house, you enter the building, and a partial payment is initiated. You maybe rent a movie or something while you're in there. The smart contract picks that up. You leave, and a full payment is made. You love the apartment, you rate it 5 star, And there it is on a blockchain, immutable. Virtually everything that the company Airbnb does could be done in this way. And that would be a powerful thing because it would mean that the owners of rooms and apartments would receive all of the value that they create. They wouldn't have 20% being taken off. We could create a real sharing economy. Or think about all the people that create value and don't get paid for it. Artists, musicians, journalists, scientists. So the music industry is a great example. I like to talk about it because I'm a musician. I'm in a band. It's called Men in Suits. Don't ask. Anyway, so 35 years ago, if you're a songwriter, you wrote a best-selling song in America, platinum song, 1 million singles, you would make $46,000 US in royalties. Today, you write a song that gets 1 million streams, you don't make $46,000, you make $35. So that'll be enough to, buy a couple of cappuccinos up in the restaurant here. So what if the music industry were based on a blockchain? Well, Imogen Heap, the great British singer-songwriter, is now doing this. And she posts her song on the blockchain, and it's inside a smart contract. And the smart contract protects her intellectual property rights. You want to listen to the song, it pays a few cents. If you want to put the song in your movie, then the contract says, well, this is the contract speaking, well, what do you want to do? You want to make it a theme song? You want someone to sing the background music? Do you want it to be a ringtone? Whatever. The way she describes it, the song acts as a business. The song is protecting my intellectual property rights and making sure that I'm fairly compensated. Number 5, do you know what the biggest flow of money is from the developed world to the developing world? I'll give you a hint. It's not foreign aid. It's not even direct corporate investment. It's remittances. I live in Toronto. It's a big Indian community. People live in Toronto, send money back to their ancestral land in India. So Annalie Domingo was a housekeeper in Toronto. For 20 years, she's been getting on the bus and the subway, going to the Filipino Mall, where the Western Union office specializes in the Filipino diaspora. She sends $400. She saves that much. $400 to her mom in Manila. It takes 4 to 7 days for the money to arrive. Her mom never knows when. And she gets charged around 10 or 11%. Takes 5 hours out of her week. Well, Annalie Domingo, 2 years ago now, started using a blockchain platform, and she sends the money from her mobile directly to her mother's mobile. And it doesn't take 7 days, it takes minutes. And when the money arrives, it looks like Uber. There are tellers. And she sees a 5-star teller. He's 7 minutes away. She clicks on him. Some guy shows up at her house and gives her Filipino pesos that she puts in her purse. The whole thing costs 1.5%. So in this scenario, Western Union is being disintermediated. But there are cool companies that are re-intermediating, creating new value. How can you build an economy with re-intermediators? Okay, my time's up, so I'm going to have to just end this. But number 6, the supply chain industry is $50 trillion in the world. All of that is moving to blockchain. It's okay? We're good. I got the bosses here saying go for it. That's going to move to a blockchain. Because think about a supply chain. You got all these different parties and people with paper and bills and lading and faxes and sending emails and invoices, and there are shippers and all kinds of airlines and boats and trucks and governments getting involved in taxing things. All of this moves in a serial and manual way, largely. What if all of that were on a blockchain, a giant ledger, you would have what we call a shared network state, where everybody can see everything that's happening at one time. Speed up the metabolism of a blockchain, of a supply chain. You'd save a ton of money, reduce errors, reduce the number of lawyers, and you bring the tonic of the market to bear on everything. This is a huge opportunity. The physical world is becoming smart and intercommunicated. My door here in the hotel has a chip in it, and it's internetworked. I had a camera stolen from a hotel in Miami, and the door knew about me. It knew who'd been in and out of the room. We actually found an unauthorized access. So I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power is connected to the internet. So, and they all talk to each other. I have no idea what his toaster says to his refrigerator, but apparently they're friends. Well, actually, he was bragging his fence around his house communicates with his sprinkler system. And I was like, well, why would you care? He says, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler comes on. It's my first line of defense against burglars. So billions now, but trillions of inert objects that are communicating. Well, that's all cool, but how about if we take it to the next level with a blockchain and they start doing transactions? And that will happen. The electrical power grid will move to a distributed model, and that light bulb will purchase some power from this grid, and the source might be the solar panel on your roof. And when that light bulb purchases the power, its reputation as a trustworthy light bulb will be enhanced. And lots of providers of power will sell to that light bulb. This is a huge thing. Number 8, we're almost done here. Platform builders. These are some of the extraordinary new things that are coming out after Bitcoin. One of these, or some combination of these, will be the new operating system for our economy. Now, think about this. Everyone says, whoa, this is all a big bubble. All these cryptocurrencies are a big bubble. Well, they're certainly a bubble. We'll see lots of bubbles go up and down. But consider that the Internet of Information, thanks to Tim Berners-Lee and Vint Cerf and DARPA, is in the commons. It's not owned by anybody. This Internet of value will be owned by individuals and companies and investors. So how much is the Internet of Information worth? How many trillions of dollars? Tens of trillions? There's an argument to be made that this is the biggest investment opportunity in human history. Now, I'm not making that argument, but I'm just trying to shake you out of the view that this is all the tulips from Holland. It's not. There's something real that's happening here. Number 9. Until India developed a modern capitalist economy, you had feudalism. That was the system that existed around the world. Today, we kind of have a data feudalism. You know, under feudalism, the serfs didn't own their land, and they grew vegetables and stuff, and they had to give it away to the nobility and the landlords and kings and so on. Isn't that kind of the way it is today? We all create this data, the new asset class of the digital age, but it gets taken away from us by Facebook and Google and by big banks and so on. We're just left with a cabbage or two. Well, what if each of us owned our own identity on a blockchain and all the transactions were captured by us? So the virtual Sandeep knows more about him than he does, because he can't remember what he bought a year ago or what he ate a year ago, what diagnosis he had a year ago, what his exact location a year ago, what he got in that test a year ago, what he said on television a year ago. Well, all of that is being captured by others. The virtual Sandeep's not owned by him. We can now get it back, or we can own our own identities. And this is a very, very powerful thing, because it means we'll be able to use this data to plan our lives. We'll be able to monetize this data if we want, and that will contribute to prosperity. because every person in India with their own independent identity becomes an entrepreneur with data to sell. And we also get to protect our privacy. People say to me, well, Don, privacy's dead. Get over it. I disagree with that. I think that privacy is the foundation of freedom. And I know you're working on building an identity system in India. You should do that on a blockchain where it's distributed and owned by the citizens. You don't want some giant government, centralized, hackable computers to be owning our identities. We should own them. The final one is a new public sector. Dubai says it wants to be the first government running fully on blockchain. That could be pretty fantastic because transparency is a very powerful thing. It's one reason. And it's really hard to be corrupt, for example, if you have transparency. It's like sunlight is the best disinfectant for corruption. You make people and institutions in power naked, and there's some corollaries that flow from that. You got to get fit, right? If you're going to be naked, you better be buff. And this is a very powerful and exciting thing. But it's not just the operations of government, it's the nature of democracy itself. We created a first era of democracy, and it was a lot better than what existed before, but there was a weak public mandate, citizens were inert, it was opaque, citizens don't know what's going on, and politicians are beholden to private interests and powerful funders, to the point that today in the United States, 98% of the population wants to see background checks for firearm purchases, and Congress can't pass a law reflecting the will of 98% of the government for the people, by the people? I don't think so. So we could move to a new model, and then maybe Sandeep and I will have a chance to talk about that. And the final one is central banks. The central bank in India, rather than worrying about cryptocurrencies, should embrace blockchain to make the rupee a cryptocurrency. Wow, would that ever be a powerful thing? Central bankers had that tool. And I look forward the next time I'm here to meet with some government leaders and central bankers to discuss. So just to close then, you know, you get a new paradigm and vested interests fight against change. Now, Jamie Dimon, head of J.P. Morgan, he actually withdrew this statement, so I'm being a little unfair here. But he said Bitcoin is a fraud. It reminds me of a number of other statements that have been made over the year. Remember Digital Equipment Corporation, second largest computer company in the world? And the CEO said 1977, there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. So how is your company going to find leadership for change? And how will India find leadership for change? Well, our experience is it's great when leadership comes from the top, and I've met with the chairman and CEOs of several of India's largest corporations and conglomerates, and we found some cases where that's absolutely happening. But leadership ultimately is leadership for learning, to get back to Peggy's comment. You need to create an organization that can learn, because it doesn't matter how smart you are at the top, you can't learn for the organization as a whole anymore. So this is a very exciting time. Why don't we have a conversation now, and we'll see where it takes us. Thank you very much.